Welcome to the Global South Chat, where we discuss all things fun and serious from the Asia Pacific, Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, and the Middle East. I'm Arlene from Malaysia.
And this is Regine from the Philippines. We are your hosts for today. So this year, it's quite an interesting year, right? It's been a year since the pandemic broke out, and it's quite timely that the theme they chose is women in leadership.
Mm.
So it's a good point of reflection to look at what are the lessons that we've learned, not only for the past year, but in women's movements, which have come a long way from the Me Too, hashtag Me Too, to the different women's marches around the world. But at the same time, we get to ask ourselves, how many women have we actually put into positions of power?
We are seeing more and more women are taking up serious role in government, in politics in general, as well as in civil society and companies. But then at the same time, we are also seeing that more things can be done. There's still a gap in terms of achieving that equality among sexes in the workplace.
True.
Mhm.
Not only among sexes, but I guess also across identities, right? Like from where we come from, what we do, class, nationality. And I guess this is why we really need to have more unity across identities, especially in the global south where we're from.
That's true. Anyway, moving on to our discussion today, we will have a lot of things that we want to share about, especially this is our first podcast for the Global South Chat. I want to give a bit of summary what we will be discussing today. First of all, we will explain to you what exactly is the Global South Chat and why we decided to start this podcast. And secondly, we will look into the pandemic itself, especially the post-COVID world. How is it going to look like, and how far women in the global south have come in conjunction with the International Women's Day? So what is the Global South Chat,
Okay.
Regine?
You and I, obviously, we're both from Asia Pacific, but we came together with our friends from the different regions in the global south that you mentioned, and hopefully more partners from across generations and across themes, just to be in unity and in highlighting the specific issues that this part of the world experiences, like differently, but also very much similarly to each other. And we want to be able to put our issues at the forefront of international news. As well, sadly, we I think we still live in a, not only like now we're celebrating International Women's Day, kind of in a man's world, but also in a white man's world.
I see when it comes to international news or in news that matters internationally, it's always news that are being highlighted by Western media from the Western perspective. And when we talk about the global South, there's a lack of perspectives coming from the global South, even on issues that they face themselves. I think having a podcast highlighting global South by youth activists and people who are actively participating in terms of developing the global south itself is, I think, is really important.
Yeah, for sure. And even looking at, numbers, because majority of the world's population live in the global south. So if we want to talk about representation, highlighting the experiences of the global south means that we're actually considering like what most people in the world are experiencing. And then of course, like if we look at our histories, we were all mostly, not all, but colonized, and so like we have multi layers of like poverty and wars that we have to experience because of our history. So like if we start from the global south, we'll be able to tackle so many problems and hopefully share the solution.
I'm looking forward to more issues that we can highlight in future series and episodes.
Arlene, one of the really interesting things for me with GSC is how we're going to be talking about post COVID world, because it's been a year since the pandemic broke out, and like we don't really know what's going to come next. Like, of course, there are all these vaccines coming out, and I don't know what's the situation in Malaysia. Have you started vaccinating your people?
Oh, I think Malaysia, just like any other country, have especially developed countries, that have bought the vaccines supply have started rolling in vaccination procedures. So in a way, yeah, there are more and more people are getting vaccinated. But the post-COVID world right now, to be honest, it has been quite a grim reality, especially with the fact that people are forced to either go into lockdown or having to have to wear face masks in public and social distancing themselves with other people, and not to mention the overloaded healthcare system where a lot of the frontliners have to cope with so many different patients. So right now, I think everyone that are working together to combat this pandemic, we need to refocus on long-term strategies of prevention and protection.
For sure, because even if we're in the at the brink of like finding a solution, we're far it's far from over. Like the all the issues that you mentioned, we're still experiencing. Like business is still not back as usual, and of course, it also has infringed on like social movements, the way we organize, and I can imagine also freedom of speech in many parts of the world. So um, okay. So what do we next talk about? Okay.
Well, one thing we can start to really talk about is how can we rebuild the trust collectively and personally.
The post-COVID world is mostly, well, currently we're mostly digital, and I can imagine maybe the post-COVID world will also be like that. Another issue is disinformation, right? Like, and I think it's like probably one of the objectives that this podcast and different media outlets should also be like keeping in mind, because whether at the government level and informing people, okay, which vaccine do they take and not, and like the down to the everyday experiences of people, like what really is happening in places like Myanmar and all these conflict ridden countries.
In a post-COVID world, information that are fact-based, that are based on science, based on factual information, it has to be at the forefront, especially on the internet and on social media and social messaging apps, because this is where people will get those information and will follow through. And this is also where we can start building trust, among society. So, really appreciate everyone for listening to our first ever podcast of today, Global South Chat. So, basically, that's all for today. It has been a pleasure discussing these topics with you guys.
Please subscribe. Don't forget to our channel, and then provide more commentary on what else but the Global South.
I'm Arlene.
And this is Regine signing off.
Bye.
Bye. That's it.
Hello, welcome to the Global South Chat, and I'm your host, Arlene. Today I'll be speaking with Fanny Arang from the UN Women. We will discuss on the issues and challenges faced by women in Asia, in particular the women participation in leadership and peace building. Hello Fanny.
Hello.
Tell me more about yourself and your work with the UN Women.
Yeah, sure. So, as you said, my name is Fanny, and I work as a program analyst in governance, peace, and security at UN Women's regional office for Asia and the Pacific. So, we cover a very big region, and I'm involved in projects aimed at promoting women's participation in violence prevention, in building community resilience, and in peace building activities. And I also work with promoting women's leadership and official decision making and political participation, which really is an issue that's been particularly highlighted this year during the COVID-19 pandemic and through the UN theme of the International Women's Day and Month, which is about women in leadership and achieving an equal future in a post-COVID-19 world as well.
Mm-hmm. You're currently based in Bangkok, right? When it comes to the UN Women.
Yes, exactly. I'm based in Bangkok.
Yeah. So when it comes to the current state of women participation in leadership and peace process, I guess an overview in Asia as well as a more narrow view in Southeast Asia, how do you see what's the current state of the situation?
Well, I mean, the women's representation in decision making continues to increase for sure, but it's at a very slow pace, and there's been some uneven progress in the region, including in Southeast Asia. But compared to like 10 or 20 years ago, I mean, much progress has been made. And we see more women in parliaments, even though unfortunately in Southeast Asia, it's comparatively low compared to other regions in the world.
What is the cause of the uneven progress for women participation in leadership and peace process in Asia?
Well, we see that it's not a straight line upwards in terms of having more women represented in peace negotiations and in decision making, but they tend to be backlashes that is connected to what's going on in the society as a whole, and there's normative changes that sometimes have implications on how you view women's role in the society as a whole. And right now, during COVID, for instance, we see backlashes on this, where these traditional gender norms or roles are kind of like moving back to where we were a few years ago, when women are seen as being assigned to the private sphere, as opposed to the public sphere. So when those normative changes happen due to something else that's going on, that's when we see an uneven progress, because it's not only always a pandemic, but it's country-specific things that happens too.
So the pandemic sort of, I guess, highlight the issue that has already been there for a very long time.
Exactly. So it's not like it's presenting a new issue. It's just exacerbating existing barriers, really.
Mm-hmm. And what are the other challenges that women in Asia are facing? And if you can give some examples.
Right now, we see that there's, for instance, especially in Southeast Asia, a greater risk that women end up in poverty due to being, overrepresented in sectors that are heavily affected by the pandemic. So there's the economic factor. And then there's also that they're carrying often the burden of increased household duties, taking care of the family, relatives, etc. And then, of course, it's being the main victims of gender-based violence, which is taking place both online or offline. But now during COVID, we see that it's increasing dramatically online as well, with a lot of online violence against women politicians and women in general.
Mm-hmm. What sort of online violence that you see?
We did actually a research, or we had a research done for us for UN Women, where we looked at the number of and the content online and how that looked like during COVID. And we saw that sexual harassment, misogynistic comments on Twitter, on Facebook, etc., often being very sexualized and in different ways, that they really spiked during the first months of the pandemic, where it was in South Asia and Southeast Asia a rise of 168% of this type of online content.
Mm-hmm. Did you see any examples or case where either the women themselves, the government, or society overcome this sort of online assaults or challenges?
I mean, yeah, they, even though, I mean, this is not a new phenomenon for women. So women have really learned what tools they need to use in order to combat this type of online hate speech. So, I mean, we have provided digital literacy trainings, for instance, for not politicians, but for other women in how to report on and how to detect and combat online hate speech against women. And we see also when it comes to politicians that they're countering it online by replying to it or reporting it, but it's a situation that takes a lot of time from them that they should be able to fulfill their political mandate. That men doesn't need to do it to the same extent.
Mm-hmm. From your observation and research, like what do you think would be the best way forward for countries in Asia to move forward in terms of uplifting the role of women and also increase the protection for women against this sort of harm online and offline?
Well, I think we already have in Southeast Asia and across the entire region a lot of grassroots women, civil society leaders, women-led organizations that are working for the promotion of women's leadership, for women's human rights, and so on, and against violence against women, both online and offline. So the biggest issue is that their efforts are too often undocumented and unrecognized, and particularly underfunded.
Mm-hmm.
So there needs to be a bigger recognition of what women are doing on the grassroots level, but also on the organizational level in this important work, because it is in place, but it needs to be valued to another extent, and that there's some multi-sector approaches to promoting gender equality and women's leadership. Working with grassroots women, with organizations, with parliamentarians, and so on.
Yeah, I think a multi-sectoral approach is definitely the way forward, but it will take a very long time, unfortunately, to push forward for this sort of agenda. One other challenges that I want to highlight: women are burdened by household duties, and they also face risk of gender-based violence, especially during this pandemic environment that we are living right now. What do you think in terms of the way forward towards this? Because I believe this is not just an Asian thing, it's also a global thing. How do you think the best forward we should focus on in terms of uplifting women in this area?
Well, first of all, you're definitely right that this is not a Southeast Asian phenomena, but it's happening in every country. In my country as well, Sweden, where I'm from, we also see a dramatic increase of domestic violence now during the pandemic. And I mean, as I said before, all the issues or burdens that women have been carried before have really just been aggravated now during the pandemic. We saw, for instance, in a few countries in Southeast Asia that during lockdowns, the reported cases of domestic violence increased by more than 100% compared to the same time last year. And I think one of the problems is that, I mean, during lockdowns, when you're kind of forced to stay at home, you lose those really important security networks that you have as a woman, whether that is with your neighbors or with colleagues or something else where you can seek protection. So that kind of safety line or that protection to some extent disappeared during the pandemic, which is a huge problem, because what is really needed is to have a safe network in place for women who are trapped in abusive relationships, or who can be, that there's a preventative approach as well, so that we don't only think about, okay, so what do we do when it has already happened, but also what can we do to change the norms and change the situations and the factors leading to that women end up as victims of, or survivors, sorry, of domestic violence, and also being in that position where they are seen as the main responsible party for taking care of their family. We saw, for instance, now in one Southeast Asian country that, or probably several, to be honest, that during the lockdowns, only the head of the family was allowed to go outside to buy essential goods and food and stuff. And because of, patriarchal gender norms, that immediately means that that's the man of the household, which just put women in further isolation because, well, they were not the ones who were supposed to go out because they're not the heads of the family. So it's really a normative work that we need to do in terms of how we see women's roles in the society, and also think about preventative measures when it comes to violence, for instance, both online and offline.
Anyway, thank you very much, Fanny. Thanks for sharing your views with us.
Thank you.